this is live. Turn off the monitor so I'm not staring at myself in infinity in the corner of the screen. Well, it's a camera taking a picture of the camera, taking a picture of the camera.
Yes.
And we deal with enough infinity inside the Torah. We don't need it on the screen. All right. So, hope everyone's enjoying this chilly February day here in Orlando at 67 degrees. I see a lot of sweaters around the room, also a lot of short sleeves,
Yes.
which is as it should be. All of this is, of course, a mask for going into our second parasha of details. This week we're now in parasha Tetzaveh, and parasha Tetzaveh deals primarily, the bulk of the parasha, with fine duds. Right, the excellent threads of the Kohanim. What are they wearing? It's what everybody wants to know from Paris this year. Is what are the Kohanim wearing? And most importantly, as we're going to focus on today, on the accessories. Right. So I commend to all of you doing a Google image search for all the different pieces of the Kohan's accoutrement. You will see lots of different depictions and descriptions, but we're going to focus on just one piece for today. We're going to focus on the choshen, or often called the choshen mishpat, which was the breastplate, right? Sound good? We'll cover a few of the other things along the way, but that's going to be our primary focus, and hopefully that will be enough for our plate. Okay, let's move on to page 504. Yeah, we can't all be good jokes. Page 504, chapter 28 is where we're going to start. Harriet, you seem to be eager to go.
I'm ready to go. Yes.
Okay.
I can hardly wait to read this. You shall bring forward your brother Aaron with his sons from among the Israelites to serve me as priests. Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Itamar, the sons of Aaron. Make sacral vestments for your brother Aaron for dignity and adornment.
All right, so we're going to be making some stuff for them. And we're making them so that they will look more honored, more beautiful, more splendid. And the whole idea, of course, is that these are only going to be worn while they're officiating. So this is to make the ceremonies that were described in a little bit more detail last chapter, and will be described in a lot more detail when we get to the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. This is to make the service of God more beautiful, splendid, and honorable. It's not just about making Aaron look good.
Next, you shall instruct all who are skillful, whom I have endowed with the gift of skill, to make Aaron's vestments, but consecrating him to serve me as priest.
All right, so unlike some things that were donated and contributed, this is going to require a level of skill that's more than just your common ability to spin wool. This is going to be extremely gifted artisans that will be making this.
These are the vestments they are to make: a breastpiece, an ephod, a robe, a fringed tunic, a headdress, and a sash.
All right, and if you don't know what an ephod is, that's okay. There's a reason why they didn't translate it from the Hebrew. It's because it's a little argumented. There's a lot of discussion. There's a machloket. Sometimes the Hebrew is easier. There's a machloket of exactly what it was. Was it an apron from here down? Was it an apron like that covered the whole body? Or did it actually cover the back as well? Was it simply tied at the back? And usually it's just considered easier. Usually it's just considered easier to call it an ephod and move on and pretend like we know what we're talking about. But like I said, it's the first one in the list. The choshen mishpat is referred to in more detail later. That is going to get the bulk of our attention today. Okay.
They shall make those sacral vestments for your brother Aaron and his sons for priestly service to me. They, therefore, shall receive the gold, the blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and the fine linen. All
right, so this is going to be good stuff. Good stuff here. This is all very rare materials. You did not have a Joann's or a Michael's that you could drive down to and pick up your yarn and wool and whatnot. This is special stuff.
May I say, this is also very specific. This isn't saying, make me something beautiful that pleases you. Which it seems to me what God is trying to say to us is, I'm going to tell you how to worship me. Don't figure it out for yourself. Don't tell me what's in your heart. I'm very specific. You don't have to make this up. I will tell you every detail.
Well, and especially in this area where there are many parallels between this service and the service that happened in idolatry, God doesn't want our imagination to take over. All right, so.
They shall make the ephod of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen, worked into designs. It shall have 2 shoulder pieces attached. They shall be attached at its 2 ends. And the decorated band that is upon it shall be made like it, of 1 piece with it, of gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen. Then take 2 lazuli stones and engrave on them the names of the sons of Israel, 6 of their names on the one stone, and the names of the remaining 6 on the other stone, in the order of their birth.
All right, so we've got 2 rocks, and we're going to have 6 names on each of the stones. That'll be carved into the stone. Got the visualization so far? Okay.
On the 2 stones you shall make seal engravings, the work of a lapidary, of the names of the sons of Israel. Having bordered them with frames of gold, attach the 2 stones to the shoulder pieces of the ephod as stones for remembrance of the Israelite people, whose names Aaron shall carry upon his 2 shoulder pieces for remembrance before the Lord.
All right. So he's wearing shoulder pads. That's Aaron. So he's going to be wearing these 2 stones. They're not really drawn to scale like that. They're probably much, much smaller. But these are going to be resting on the shoulders that connect to the straps that connect to the rest of the ephod together.
Epaulets.
What's that?
Epaulets.
Epaulets, a good way to put it. And again, what's on these?
Names.
The names.
The names of what?
The 12 sons of
The
Jacob.
names of the 12 sons of Jacob, right? And at least in this particular section, we're talking about 1 through 12, right? We're talking about birth order for how they are going to be arranged. Make sense? Maybe?
Maybe.
Weiter.
Then make frames of gold and 2 chains of pure gold. Braid these like corded work and fasten the corded chains to the frames.
Okay, like I said, you can find lovely images of all this online, none of which will agree with each other, but they're all very pretty depictions of what this might have looked like.
You shall make a breastpiece of decision.
All right, here's our Choshen Mishpat. Start paying attention.
Worked into a design, make it in the style of the ephod, make it of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen.
All right, so first of all, I don't want to shatter any illusions. What is the Choshen made out of? What is its base material?
Cloth.
Cloth, right? So when you walk into the sanctuary, when you open up the Aron HaKodesh in the sanctuary and you see the Sifrei Torah and there is a breastplate on it, what are those breastplates usually made of? Silver, metal, right? Some decorative piece of metal. And when we think of knights and shining armor and we talk about their breastplates, what were they made of? Metal, right? So most people think of the breastplate of the high priest as being a giant metal plate in the center of his chest. It wasn't. It was cloth. It was woven together and made of and all of this very fine and intricate way. And although there were gold pieces that were used in it, it itself was not a solid, inflexible piece of metal. This was a garment more than it was a slab. Make sense? Okay.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
No, please.
I didn't hear what an FO was.
Well, that's because I didn't say. Yeah, the whole point of using the term ephod in the translation is because we're not 100% sure what it is. It definitely seems to be a decorative garment rather than just your regular kind of, pants or kind of thing. And it was probably apronish. The question is whether it covered all the way up to here or whether the straps went down to a waist part that went down. And that gets debated among the different people who try to revisualize this. But it's easier just to call it an ephod because we are not 100% sure what it looked like. So it's a good question.
So this breastpiece shall be square and doubled, a span in length and a span in width.
All right, when it says doubled here, again, for purposes of clarification, that means that you've got this square piece of cloth that is folded over itself, okay? So the cloth comes down and then it folds back up inside of itself so that you've got a little pouch, right? If you've ever seen like a hoodie that's got that little, through thing for your hands, That's what we're talking about. So you can go, whoop, and it comes out over there. It's folded in half. That's important later.
Set in it mounted stones in 4 rows of stones. The first row shall be a row of carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald. The second row, a turquoise, a sapphire, and an amethyst. The third row, a jacinth, an agate, and a crystal. And the fourth row, a beryl, a lapis lazuli, and a jasper.
You did very well with those wonderful English words. We all know these, right?
Yes, I certainly.
We're all gemologists here. Then we know our stones perfectly. Yeah. What's that? Most of them not bad. Well done. We should do a quiz someday with like a whole pile of rocks and see who can pick which. Put them in the correct order. Yeah, keep going.
They shall be framed with gold in their mountings. The stones shall correspond in number to the names of the sons of Israel, 12 corresponding to their names. They shall be engraved like seals, each with its name for the 12 tribes.
All right, so we've got our 12 stones with 12 names on them that are going to be put into the choshen, the breastplate. Again, plate is kind of the misleading term there. How are we doing? Make sense? We got our visualization here.
And each stone is framed in gold.
And each stone is framed in gold, but I'm not going to risk trying to circle them.
Yes.
Exactly right.
Sewn onto them.
That's how they would have been attached. Just like if you were to have a stone set into a ring or a necklace, you would not just try and attach the stone to the necklace. You'd cover it in a gold frame that was secure, and then you would hook the gold frame to the necklace. So too here, I'll do it just once. It's kind of like, if you imagine like that, and you've got a little hole on each side, now you can sew it, and it'll be firm attached to that plate, that cloth square.
Do we have a sense of how this compares to the great priests of Egypt in terms of how ornate they were dressed?
I don't know. I haven't spent a lot of time looking at the dress of the ancient of the Egyptians. I've never heard of anyone, which doesn't mean it's not there, but I've never heard of anyone saying that this was that similar to what they would have done. We know that they would have been dressed elaborately, but I don't know exactly how. It's a good question. That's something to look up after class. Thank you. It's always like little questions that I can, I hadn't thought of it. Let me go take a look later.
On the breastpiece, make braided chains of corded work in pure gold. Make 2 rings of gold on the breastpiece and fasten the 2 rings at the 2 ends of the breastpiece, attaching the golden cords to the 2 rings at the end of the breastpiece. Then fasten the 2 ends of the cords to the 2 frames, which you shall attach to the shoulder pieces of the ephod at the front. Make 2 rings of gold and attach them to the 2 ends of the breastpiece at its inner edge, which faces the ephod, and make the 2 other rings of gold and fasten them on the front of the ephod, low on the 2 shoulder pieces, close to its seam, above the decorated band.
All right, so we're probably, again, the terminology is a little tricky here, looking at something like that, where it's going to be then attached to the body. I guess the question is, how are you wearing this thing? And it's being sort of strapped on to the different parts of the other garment. All right. Again, I can't swear to the 100% perfection of this as a pattern for a seamstress, but we're in the ballpark.
The breastpiece shall be held in place by a cord of blue from its rings to the rings of the ephod, so that the breastpiece rests on the decorated band and does not come loose from the ephod. Aaron shall carry the names of the sons of Israel on the breastpiece of decision over his heart when he enters the sanctuary, for remembrance before the Lord at all times. Inside the breastpiece of decision, you shall place the Urim and Thummim, so that they are over Aaron's heart when he comes before the Lord. Thus, Aaron shall carry the instrument of decision for the Israelites over his heart before the Lord at all times.
All right, so the Urim and Thummim go into that little pouch that was made by folding over the choshen. Remember, I told you that was going to be important. So we've got a little loop of fabric at the bottom, and that's where they could put in these special 2 things. We've talked about them before, and I'm not going to go into that today.
I have a question, and I don't mean to distract from
my wonderful art.
here.
Yes.
Yeah. What did they wear underneath that?
They would have worn more like a another layer of tunic, and then special trousers
Of linen.
of linen. Yes,
They weren't
exactly.
naked underneath it, so they had clothes.
Well, go down deep enough, you're always naked. But yes,
Yeah.
but it wasn't just this. Exactly. It
Right, so
wasn't
that
just
even when
this.
they walked up the steps, you wouldn't see underneath and see anything.
Right, exactly. This is long before the days of Fruit of the Loom, so you did need to cover things lower as well. Yes.
And our Torahs, the Torah covers,
Mhm.
are sort of an imitation of this, are they not? With the
Absolutely.
bells and everything.
Exactly, because at the bottom of the tunic, you would have had little bells.
Yeah.
That would have been in the form of pomegranates, rimonim, which is what we still use on our Torah. Many times you do still see breastplates on the Torah.
Yeah.
You see a colorful
Right.
tunic that goes over the Torah. So what we've basically done is erased him. And now we've got a Torah,
There you go.
right? So what we did was transform the dress of the high priest into the dress of the Torah. And that is a massive theological and spiritual statement. That even though we don't have the high priest, we have something just as good, which is the Torah itself. Which is not that surprising when you think about it, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. If we hadn't made a transition from needing a high priest to respecting the Torah in his stead, we would have gone the way of the dodo when the high priest fell with the fall of the temple. So it's a very natural evolutionary step. Okay, so the JPS translation, even as complicated as it was, and thank you, Harry, for taking us through all of the loops of this and the ring of that, is still papering over some fundamental issues. Like, what were these rocks? It made it sound like they had a definition for every single one of these rocks. And indeed, they have an interpretation for every single one of these stones. But if you were to put that list and the corresponding stones that go with those definitions in English next to the lists of other people throughout antiquity, well, you would find a lot of people said, no, you got the wrong ones in the wrong place, or you have completely the wrong stone entirely and the other stone should have been used instead. And if we start off with Ibn Ezra, we'll see very clearly.
We have no way of knowing what the stones were because we have no reliable tradition.
All right, so a lot of these rocks only make their appearance here in the entire Bible, which means we get no other context for what their color is, what their style is. It's just a word, which is why it would probably be more honest to simply translate them, like the word ephod, by just copying over the Hebrew, because we don't have 100% reliable tradition of exactly which rock it was. Make sense? Right? So unfortunately, even though you could possibly paint a picture of what we think this looks like, the details of exactly which rock by a geologist's estimation would go in each slot is something we will never be able to accomplish until Mashiach comes.
So if you went to modern Hebrew, going back to
Mhm.
50 years or so, you would not find definite or Hebrew words for.
Oh, you would,
various
absolutely.
numbers, But they don't
But-
match this translation.
Well, and that's the issue, is that there are certain words in modern Hebrew which are based upon some interpretations during the medieval period that are not necessarily
From here.
accurate to the biblical period. And so therefore, we could go to a Hebrew-English dictionary for modern Hebrew and probably come up with good translations of all of these. But there's no guarantee that the modern Hebrew word is being used to reflect the same stone that the biblical Hebrew word was being used for. There's a very famous example for that with maror, which most modern Hebrew dictionaries is going to translate for you as horseradish. Right? There is no way in God's green earth that maror meant horseradish in the Torah. But if you were to look in a modern Hebrew dictionary, that's what you would get, and you'd think you were doing fine. So yeah, modern Hebrew is helpful, but it is not decisive by any stretch of the imagination, because it's a language like most others. Hasn't had quite as much drift in some ways as other languages like English, but it has definitely had semantic drift. Meaning words don't always mean what they used to mean. English is even worse, but we're not here to critique English.
Don't you find that surprising in that I presume this existed to the end of the Second Temple,
Mhm.
which was like what, 770?
Yeah, only 2,000 years ago.
But by then, you would think that is such an important item in Judaism that it would have been written about by countless people, talking about the specifics of the wardrobe and most especially the breastplate.
But may I say, by that point, the priests were corrupt. We wanted to have nothing more to do with them. And I don't know that we would have wanted to continue on anything that they were doing because they weren't that great.
And even if it were being righted about, English,
Yeah.
even if it were being written about, there's no guarantee that we would be able to understand those writings. Because if they said, oh, this is the stone that comes from
Yeah.
name some foreign country that we don't know the name location of today, it might have been a useful reference for them, but it wouldn't be a useful reference for us. So we can, and many scholars do, make an attempt to identify all of these rocks. And they have lots of clues and evidence, and some of them are more likely than others in their interpretations. But as Ibn Ezra pointed out, we don't know 100%. We can't know 100%.
Well, let me put it a different way. Are we relatively confident that the breastplate worn by the last
High priest.
high
Right?
priest was correct? That it was passed down generation to generation.
I've
correct?
never seen any interpretation that said it wasn't. Yeah, that he was dressed properly, he just wasn't behaving properly.
Right.
Yeah,
You're right.
yeah, the right clothes, just not the right attitude. All right, but at least we've got one thing clear, right? We've got the names of all the people on the stones. Isn't that simple? Except,
Rashi says the stones were arranged in birth order.
right? Now remember, when we talked about the shoulder pieces of the ephod, it says explicitly in the Torah that the stones would be arranged in the birth order, right? That's clear. In this one, it says the names of the sons of Jacob will be on it, but it doesn't explicitly say how they're going to be arranged. And so one argument, according to Rashi, is it was the same, right? 1 through 12 and 1 through 12 on the breastplate too. But,
Kuni says they were arranged according to the birth order of each mother.
right, so Leah's children were done, and then Bilhah, and then Zilpah, and then Rachel's, right? So that they would be done not in the order to which they were born to Jacob, which would be interspersing between the different mothers, but you'd have a collection of each separated by who was giving birth.
So suppose everyone agreed
Mhm.
who should be represented by these stones. Would you know right to left or up
Oh,
and
yeah,
down? I mean,
Another issue.
Well, would we know? Obviously, the ancients did, but would we know? The question is no. Chances are that the assumption would be that we're going in the direction of Hebrew and that we're going from top to bottom. That's the general supposition. But do we have 100% absolute, photographic evidence of that? Nope. But we can make a strong assumption on that point at least. However, now we have two different orders. Or is it three?
So Abravanel says the stones were arranged in the order given in Numbers 2, which was how they camped around the Mishkan. There was no stone for Levi, but stones for Ephraim and Manasseh.
All right, so you probably were wondering this. I'm sure you were.
I
And I'll voice it for you, which is how many sons did Jacob have? 12, right? Beginning with Reuben and ending with Benjamin, and with Joseph being near the end. And how many kids did he adopt from Joseph?
2.
2,
Ephraim and Manasseh.
which means 2 plus 12 is,
14. And
we've got 12 stones, right? So of the total number of sons of Jacob, including native born to him and then adopted as his grandsons, we should have 14. We've only got 12. And we know we only got 6 and 6 up on the shoulder plates as well. And so Abravanel, first of all, is saying that they were going to be arranged in the order in which they're mentioned in Bamidbar, which is in the order that they would be camped around the tabernacle, the Mishkan, because, that makes sense. And that means you don't need to have Levi because Levi was the tabernacle. And you don't need to have Joseph because Joseph wasn't part of the encampment. His 2 sons Ephraim and Manasseh were part of the encampment. So you take Levi and Joseph out of the mix, and now you're back down to 12. Yay! Fun with names and math, right? So now we have 3 different versions of not just who's on it, but also what order they're in. Complicated?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let's put that to one side. Why are we doing this in the first place? Why in the world is the Kohen Gadol being adorned with a piece of cloth that has 12 stones that have the names of 12 of the groupings of our people? Why bother to make this? Let's give one start answer.
Okay. Above the names of the tribes were the names of the patriarchs, and below them were the words, the tribes of the Lord, so that Aaron should be thinking of them all together, not each one separately.
All right. So what you're basically picturing here is that you would have, Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, sort of those are abbreviations up here, and then you would have, the tribes. The Shvatim of God, and that would be like kind of a sentence, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of these other guys who are the tribes of God, meaning we are one unit. See how that works? By positing, as Ralbag does, that there was a little bit more writing around this on the edges. It says this is just the middle part of a sentence, which is trying to say we, from start to all the other tribes, we are one. We're one group, so that when the Kohen Gadol went in to the Holy of Holies, or was officiating in any way, he wouldn't be thinking about Reuben and Simeon and God. He'd be thinking about the people of Israel. From the first, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, through the tribes, collectively. Make sense? Because apparently, Relbach was a little bugged, and I think other people were, that why should we need to enumerate the different tribes, right? Aren't we all in this together? And he was trying to find a way to visualize this, that we were all together, rather than being 12 separate categories. Throughout our history, that was kind of an issue. We didn't always work and play well together, as they say.
By the time he's writing it also, we don't know which of the 12 tribes came. We're either Israelites or Kohanim, but we don't know our individual tribes anymore anyway.
By the time Relbach
By
is
the time
writing,
he's writing
yes,
this.
yes.
So if we focus on individual tribes, we're all Israelites now.
Well, yes,
That's what he's trying to
apart
say.
from the Kohanim and Levi'im,
Right.
we're all Israelites in the generic sense,
Yes.
but we're also all Bnei Yisrael, the children of Jacob, the children of Israel, in the broadest sense. And that's what he's trying to say here.
Say them all together. Yeah, okay. I like that.
So the order still doesn't matter
Right.
whether it's which of the 3
Exactly.
choices.
Right.
Exactly. For Relbach, the order is not important. I'm sure he had his own opinion about the order, because he's a great commentator, so he's got to say something. But it doesn't matter for this teaching, which is all of this was written in order to show the collectiveness of our people rather than the distinctiveness of our people, of our tribes.
Now, Avraham quotes from one of the Psalms that we actually do during Hallel.
Very good. Thank
Right.
you.
The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, Psalm 23. And that means the children of Israel were the building blocks of the nation.
Right? Evan Masu Habonim, Haita Rosh Pina, right? The stone that was cast aside by the builders has become, Rosh Pina has become the cornerstone. And the idea being here is that why are we making stones at all? Why not just write the names on the piece of cloth? A lot easier than trying to carve stone in the ancient world. No laser engravers back there, no special water cutters. Because the idea was we were the stones of together which that became the building blocks of the nation. Make sense? Maybe most of us haven't seen enough stone buildings. They're not that popular here in Florida to imagine this, but you have to think of this as being the foundation of something, and you want those stones to be strong and clean and ready to then build up onto. And it takes all of the stones in order to have a foundation. Right? You can't just put down one rock and then everything else gets built on the mud. You need to have solid rocks all the way around to then build on. Make sense? So again, it's visualizing this collectively of this is an image of a foundation, and these are the foundation stones. Yes? No? We getting the metaphor?
I do get the metaphor, I think. I'm just not understanding why it should be so bothersome to someone like Ralbag when every day, 3 times a day, we pray in the name of the 3 patriarchs. We're used to this collective idea that it's expanded to the tribes. Shouldn't, no, so where's the finish here, you know?
So where's the chiddush here? The chiddush is, you're thinking like someone who's lived 2,000 years of this. Ralbag is saying this was being created a few months after we left Egypt. And that was what it was meant to symbolize to those people. They didn't have the full Amidah. They didn't have the 3 times a day of praying in the name of the patriarchs. They didn't have a history of saying anachnu, 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 meaning Bnei Yisrael. You know, the tribes didn't have a great history up to this point. I mean, after all, the actual brothers who started the tribes tried to kill each other. So this is trying to set a foundation of saying we are together. The fact that it seems so blindingly obvious to you means it worked.
Oh.
Right? And that's good. But it was new then. And it was necessary to say explicitly then. Michael, did you have a comment?
It was not only for Aaron's benefit. He should think about all the tribes, but when people saw him with all of this regalia, they would think that we're all together.
Exactly, because one of the big dangers of building this whole Mishkan and of having Aaron and his sons be pulled aside as the Kohanim, having the Levi'im set up as the sort of protectors and servers of the Mishkan and later the temple, was they became sort of in a status of elite or separate. And this is a remarkably good metaphor, I can square it one more time, of saying, yes, but it's not just about him or them, it's about us. And that's what's being carried in the heart constantly, for his benefit and for ours to remember.
And it's also part of what when you talk about tribes, we see a lot of tribal warfare. Tribes fight each other. They're not all one.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. Yeah.
But for us, it's different. As tribes, we are still all one.
Which should be different, exactly.
We should be different.
We have a history that says we don't always remember that. But you're absolutely right. The idea is, the teaching is, it should be that we are all one. Just have to start reading them through the book of Judges and then onwards, and you're going to see the tribes don't always get along so well. Okay, next text.
Okay, so in Deuteronomy, the priests say, "Forgive your people, O Israel, your people of Israel, O Lord, whom you redeemed."
All right, and a typical midrash fashion, we're going from the book of Sifrei here, which is the midrash, earliest midrash on this. We're going to take that apart.
Now, when it says "whom you redeemed," this teaches that this forgiveness atones for those who left Egypt. When it says "forgive your people," this refers to those who are alive. And then when it says "whom you redeemed," this refers to those who are dead. This teaches that the dead require atonement. Hence, we learn that a murderer affects sin all the way back to those who left Egypt. Whom you redeemed? You redeemed us in order that there should not be any murderers among us.
Okay, all confused?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, that's exactly where I wanted you. So what the Sifrei is saying here is that this phrase about redemption, which is a big part of what the Mishkan and what we are supposed to be doing in our life is about, is saying it's not just about you, right? Your people, O Israel, O Lord, whom you redeemed, that can be divided into 2 pieces, and saying that God redeems the people in the past and he redeems the people in the present. And this is where the chiddush comes, where the novelty comes, is also saying that even those who are dead can be redeemed after the fact. And more shockingly, even those who commit crimes now can generate sin retroactively affecting the past. All right, we just went into the 4th dimension, people.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Okay, what we're saying is that it's not just a 2-dimensional, I read it one more time. We're not just a 2-dimensional idea of today and us. We are saying this goes back into the past and forward into the future, right? We got the past and we got the future. And at any given time, the people of Israel are anywhere along this path, but it is a contiguous block, and the actions of someone at the end of time affects those at the beginning of time, and the actions of those at the beginning of time affects those at the end.
Could you go into that a little more?
We are. We are, okay?
Oh.
You know, I find that slightly disturbing,
Good.
because that's where the Mormons got their idea of.
Of baptizing ex post facto,
Baptized,
yes.
Right.
Exactly right. So it seems a little foreign.
I
To-
find it offensive.
Well, it's not just offensive, because I mean that can maybe be a personal feeling, but the Torah says explicitly, as do other prophets, that the person who commits the transgression, they're the person in trouble, right? And the person who does the mitzvah, they're the person who gets the reward. So the idea that there's somehow an atemporal, a timeless influence running both directions through time seems to not just be offensive in the way that the Mormon baptism of the dead is offensive, but also seems to be counterintuitive to notions of justice and right. Because after all, why should me murdering someone cause a blemish on our nation at the shore of the sea in Egypt? I mean, the time doesn't run that way, and they're not responsible for my murder now. And certainly whatever they did, you know, golden calf and whatnot, I'm not responsible for that. So it seems very, very counterintuitive.
Well, to put it a little bit better, if you murder somebody, God forbid, I'm going to look to your parents and say, what kind of kid did you raise? And they're going to look and say, I did just what my parents did. And maybe it goes back that you came from a line that didn't teach you any better.
What are you saying about my family? There may indeed be something to that, right? I mean, maybe we're not talking about mystical transmutation of effect through across the myths of time. Maybe we're just talking about, you know, if the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, then if I see the apple, I know something about the roots. And so maybe it's the stigma of transgression can work backwards. We certainly know that the stigma, at least, can work forwards, as people who come from an, in quote, bad family often have a hard time, no matter how good they're being accepted by other people who think of them only as being from that family.
Does this have something to do with the collective morality?
I think the phrase collective morality is a great one to save for the second page.
Okay.
So you're anticipating where we're headed. You're traveling through time.
Yeah.
See, it's very appropriate. All right, let's see a few more texts under this our belt, because this is a confusing notion.
Also, to add to the confusion,
Yes.
they that had come from the captives of the exile offered up whole offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bullocks for all Israel, 99 rams, 77 lambs, and as a purification offering, 12 he-goats, all this as a burnt offering for the Lord.
All right, so this is from the book of Ezra, and the Talmud is discussing why are they offering all of these sacrifices during the time of Ezra? What in the world do they think they're doing? What's the purpose of all of these sacrifices? And Rabbi Yehuda is going to say,
it was on account of the idolatry that they had carried out in the days of Zedekiah.
all right, so Zedekiah, right at the end of the kingdom of Judah, one of the worst kings, massive idolater, made everybody else idolaters too, which didn't need that much convincing. And the idea that's being espoused here by Shmuel is that the people in Ezra's time were offering up sacrifices on behalf of those who had committed idolatry before the exile began, which we're talking about being at least a gap of 70 years. Right? So it's their ancestors had committed these crimes, and now they are offering up sacrifices in the newly restored temple, which had been destroyed because of those crimes, to make up for what their ancestors had done. Kind of. Maybe. That's what it seems to be saying. Yes? Uncomfortable? Weird? Right? If my great-grandfather was bowing to an idol, I have to bring a goat. But that's not what the Torah says. It's the soul that sins. That's the one that is then on the hook, right? Why would I be responsible for someone 70 years ago? Which is what the Talmud's going to attack.
Yeah, but how can the matter involve Zedekiah, as Judah alleges, when those who sinned in the time of Zedekiah had died by the time of Ezra?
Right? So the Talmud is also perplexed by this and says, how can you say you're going to offer a sacrifice today for what was done 70 years ago? That doesn't work. Hold on, we
I
gotta,
was gonna say, but it says that the sins shall be revisited on the seventh generation.
so it does say in the Ten Commandments that, the sins will be visited upon the third and fourth generation. But the question there is, does that mean that the third or fourth generation has to bring a sacrifice? Or just that the effect, the outcome of that transgression is going to continue to have reverberations? Nowhere in Torah and nowhere in Halakha does it say that a grandson or daughter is obligated to bring a sacrifice for a sin of the grandparent. Nowhere does it say that. And this seems to be implying that that's what the community was undertaking, that they were doing sacrifices on behalf of the transgressions of the nation from before the exile.
And they couldn't do it even though there was no obligation to do it?
Well, but it's kind of an odd precedent to set, which is why this section from Ezra is being taken apart by the Talmud, because they want to figure out what in the world's going on here.
Said Rav Papa, while it is a tradition, a sin offering, the owners of which have died, is left to die. That rule applies in the case of an individual, not in the case of the community, for the community never dies.
Okay, so Rav Papa is drawing a distinction. He says, look, if you've got the granddad, and granddad has committed some transgression, and he designates a cow as being his sin offering, and on the way to the temple, granddad dies. The cow does not go to the temple and get sacrificed on his behalf. You just put the cow out in the field, you feed it, and let it die of old age, right? Because you can't sacrifice it, you can't eat it, you can't use it because it's been designated for the temple. But you also can't sacrifice it because the person for whom the sacrifice was going to be made is no longer there. And you can't sacrifice on behalf of the dead. Except, says Rav Papa, when the dead aren't actually dead. When the dead...
The community.
Because there are some things that never die. The community. Right?
So it would be like the Germans atoning for World War II, this generation and the next one.
Exactly. Germany can try to make reparations and atonement. The individual great-grandchild of some SS officer is not held liable for the actions of their great-grandfather. Right? The nation can make atonement. The community can, because the community never dies. The community is both its past and its future and its present. And therefore, the community is responsible for what needed to be done to fix what it did in the past. Collectively, exactly, not individually.
Scarily, that makes sense.
Feeling better? A little bit?
A little bit better, yes.
Yeah. It's not as offensive, but it's still burdensome. I mean, this is a massive responsibility then.
Yeah.
Because if the community never dies, it means you never wipe the slate clean until you wipe the slate clean. You can't just say, you know what, that was a long time ago, so we don't talk about that anymore. It's like, well, unless we've actually done what we needed to do to make what happened a long time ago right, then absolutely it's still on us. Okay, let's keep going for this.
A child can grant merit to the parent.
Right, so this is one of the phrases that's often used for trying to understand how the mourner's Kaddish works, or other forms of mitzvot on behalf of those who have passed. And the idea being that merit doesn't only flow down from the river, from the past to the present and on to the future, but that merit can also flow upstream. That the deeds of the next generation can be to the merit of the previous. Okay, that may not seem too, well, let's see.
Oh, so Rav Shimon said, we find that the Holy One, blessed be he, does kindness for the later generations because of the merit of the earlier ones.
Right, so that first sentence is one that is very, very familiar. Whenever you say the Amidah, right, the very first blessing of Avot, we talk about the zichut, we talk about the merit of our ancestors, and it's kind of like the trust fund. There's sort of this notion that because of their righteousness, we still reap the interest off of that there was still benefit to us because of what they did. Now that seems perfectly logical and normal. If they create a good and proper family and society and communities, will continue to reverberate with that goodness on and on and on. It's a never-ending payoff for what they did. Sounds great, but we can also turn the arrow of time around.
Where do we find that God deals with the earlier generations according to the merit of the later ones?
Right? Make sure we understand that. That God is going to be kind to the people in the past because of what their descendants will eventually do.
Now here where it says descendants, you don't mean descendants, do you?
What? What did I write?
Noah.
I think
Noah
it should
found
be
favor in the eyes of the
descendants.
Lord.
What did I say? Descendant?
No, because of the merit of his descendants.
Descendants.
I thought so. That's
Yes,
what I
thank you.
meant. Because of the merit
Bad
of his-
spell check.
Okay. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord because of the merit of his descendants. These are the descendants of Noah. in
Right.
Bereshit.
So if you look in Parashat Noach, where it straddles the line between that and Bereshit, it finishes Bereshit by saying, and Noah found favor in the eyes of God. And then the very next sentence is, and these are the descendants of Noah. It's Toldot, right? These are the generations of Noah. And the way the Midrash is reading this is saying, why did Noah find favor in the eyes of God? Because of his descendants. It wasn't Noah himself that was so special that God decided he would work with Noah for this whole ark business. It was because of what his descendants would do that Noah then had the merit to be taken on board for this project.
That's good. Take it
On board, yes.
On
Well, we're talking about the Ark of Time here,
Nice.
okay? That's also a Doctor Who reference. But so how are we working with this?
That's
Right.
good.
It's
Yeah,
good,
that's-
but
that's good.
we have to, but let's read one more Midrash that's on the same theme, and then we'll try and pull it together.
Never let the mitzvah of the Omer be light in your eyes, for on account of it, Abraham merited to inherit the land of Canaan. Because it says,
Now, Abraham never did the Omer.
right,
This was not a mitzvah for Abraham. This is a mitzvah for way after Mount Sinai when we finally settle in the land.
I will give you and your offspring after you, and you will keep my covenant, which was the Omer.
Right? It's so obvious. This one's a little bit less obvious than the Noah one, but it's trying to teach the same theme, and I wanted to show that it wasn't just one voice within the tradition that said that this column of time was more multi-directional than we generally think of. All right, so how are we doing so far? Now, how does this work? How do you end up with this notion that the 12 that are one at one point in time, as represented by the Choshen Mishpat, as represented by this breastplate, are actually all of those before and past, all together, all is one? Well, the only way that works is if you recognize that even though we only see life and the universe as slice by slice, God doesn't. Right? God gets to see the beginning and the end simultaneously. We only get to see one slice. We only see one breastplate at a time. The breastplate today, the breastplate tomorrow, the breastplate the next day. We only see the unification of our people in a tiny little slice. And we only see the effects of what we did yesterday coming to today, because that's how we are pointed. That our eyes are forward. We are going forward through time from our perspective. But God can see from the beginning to the end. And therefore, God understands that what will happen should affect what did happen. Even though that makes no sense to us, it's perfectly fine if you exist entirely outside of time. Of course, you don't, God does. Does that make some sense? Or did I just break everybody's brain?
No, I'm just wondering if this at all has an impact on, I'm not sure that's what I mean, with the notion, Notzer Chesed Lalafim,
Mhm.
is that also this, or is that something else entirely?
It certainly can be. The idea of giving the benefit and showing kindness to the thousandth generation. I couldn't say that when I was studying decimals as a kid either. Definitely seems to be harmonious with this notion that there are reverberations. But what's so amazing here is that they're saying the reverberations happen in both directions.
Yes.
And that much of what happened in the past is because of what would come in the future. Which means we're not only the inheritors of our ancestors' merit, we are also the generators of their merit.
That's why the idea of yichus, our
Mhm.
lineage,
Mhm.
is so important.
Well, but it's
That would be
it is, but it's also breaking that notion, because yichus, the idea of who's your family, who are you from, what were your ancestors, is one direction. And this is saying it works the other way too. The reason your ancestors were so great is because of you, not just you're so great because of them.
If we remember the medrash about all Jewish souls were present at Sinai.
Mm-hmm. That
all
fits.
the ones who lived then and who will live forever.
Exactly right.
Then we are all one people, and therefore we are all, we go across time.
Right. We are a timeless collective. Of corporate morality, I think, was the term that was used. And we're going to get to the morality part here in just the next two texts.
But how can a deed atone for someone who did not perform that deed when he was alive? However,
Right? So the idea is, how can you do a sacrifice on behalf of someone who didn't do the sacrifice when they were alive? I mean, it should be the person that does the mistake, does the deed, and then to fix the mistake, and then the mistake is fixed. You can't separate the deed from the person. So how does this work?
Okay, however, thus stated the Holy One. A son provides merit for the father. For example,
Which is our quote from the Talmud that we had up at before in Sanhedrin 104.
if the father was a sinner, but ensured that his son studied Torah and performed good deeds, then since it was due to the father that the son thus merited, the son provides merit to the father. If the parents instruct the children to perform deeds after their passing, then when the children perform these deeds, it is as though the parents performed them.
Right? And that's Sefer Hasidim, section 101, not like the class 101.
Oh, yeah, right.
Right? Just making sure if you want to look it up. This isn't a syllabus. So what does that say? That if somebody has done something wrong, but they have set in motion ways of fixing it through the next generation, does it count for them or not?
Well, the Shema, which we pray daily 3 times, says, teach it diligently to your children.
Absolutely.
It's a very important precept that you teach your children this, even if you're not doing it, teach it to them.
And this is one of the best antidotes to people who say, well, I can't bother doing this because, or telling my children to do this because I don't do it, so I feel like a hypocrite. It's like, go ahead, feel like a hypocrite. At least give your children the right direction, even if you're not walking that direction. And that will be counted to your credit. You know, you may not be able to swim all the way to the island, but if you can take your kid halfway and they can swim the rest, then it counts as you got them to the island. Like, you got them to where they needed to be. One of the most famous examples of this idea is Psalm 30, right? Hanakat Habayit LeDavid, right? The dedication of the house of David, which is, we say for Hanukkah, but also daily. And the sages say, how can you say the Bait, the temple, was of David? Because David didn't build it. Very famously, he didn't build it. And the idea is, no, but he prepared and instructed his son to build the temple. So even though he didn't put hand to brick, he still built it because he made sure that it would happen after he was gone. And so David is credited with having built the temple spiritually, even if he didn't do it physically. Make sense? Okay. And let's wrap it up on one more heavy burden of responsibility.
Isn't it that for all of the transgressions of the Torah, the whole world is punished? Because as it is written, and they shall stumble one on the other.
Right? So think about this. If you commit a transgression, the entire world is in trouble. Because when you commit a transgression, well, as you're going to say, others are going to stumble over you. Right? It's like the classic Keystone Cops, right? The first cop who rushes through the door and stops, and all the others plow into him, and now everybody's on the floor. Right?
Right. One stumbles by reason of the sin of his fellow, teaching that every Israelite is a surety for each other.
Right? Kol Yisrael are Arivim Zeh Bazeh. Okay? The idea that we are all surety, we are collateral against each other, which means, what collateral means, co-signers in modern term might also be a good term, means that if someone else takes out a loan and they default, you're on the hook for it. If someone else commits a transgression, you're on the hook for it. Because we're all in that same plate together. Right? We are all together. And of course, the great thing about the Talmud is it's saying the plate even extends beyond the 12. One more time, man. I got just an addiction to doing that square. Is that it extends globally as well. right? That we are responsible for everybody and everything that is happening everywhere. And according to our earlier teachings, every win.
But the good news is if somebody does a good thing, then we all get credit for it.
Exactly. But the reverberations for our mitzvot of the good deeds and our fulfillment of the commandments also reverberate throughout all time, not just forward.
But that refers to a case in which they have the power to prevent the sin and did not prevent it.
So what does it mean to be on the hook? It means that you had a capacity to try and stop what was happening, and you didn't. So just to back it off a little bit, you're not responsible for every crime committed by every generation and every point of humanity, but you are responsible for all the things that are within your view, within your purview, within your power to at least protest and to at least try to stop. And if you don't, then you are part of what is causing this temporal ripple of deeds. And if you stop it, you're part of the temporal ripple of positive deeds. How we doing? Okay?
Wow.
That's a lot from 12 stones.
Yeah, 12 stones. Yeah, who would have thought that the beginning of the scripture would
Who would have thought? God would have thought.
I suppose so.
Right? And this is the idea of what the Kohen carries when he walks into the Holy of Holies. Is he's not just carrying the people camped around with the smell of the incense and the sound of the cows and the goats. Right? He is carrying the entirety of history and the direction and the past of not just our people, but the world as a whole. And that's why what we do is so important. Right? Every time we act, we're throwing a rock into the pond, and the ripples are going both directions.
Isn't it somewhat of a foundation of democracy?
There's a lot going on in here that says, yes, there needs to be collective responsibility, and that means there needs to be collective decision-making. If I'm on the hook for everything, then that means I need to participate in making sure that everything goes well. And if you prevent me from doing so, you're preventing me from living up to my obligations. You're taking away not just my rights, which is sort of the general American way of looking at democracy, but you're taking away my obligation. You're stopping me from fulfilling my duty, which is to prevent bad things from happening and to cause good things to happen.
The problem with that thinking, though, is equating democracy with morality. You can have a majority of people vote for Hitler and bring him into office, and then the whole thing explodes. But it was started in democracy.
Right. So democracy is not a guarantee for morality, but I think you could argue that democracy, if properly being done, is a prerequisite for the full realization of our own fulfillment of obligation. So it's no guarantee. Just because you have democracy doesn't mean the outcomes are always going to be good. But without democracy, without the ability for everybody to participate in trying to make sure that what's happening, then we're making a mockery of the notion that we are all responsible for each other. Because if my hands are being tied, how can I be responsible for you? And if I'm being tied by a dictator...
If you're subjected to a tyrant, look at North Korea, can you really blame the citizens for the collective?
Yes, you can, I would say.
Well, and then we get into the question of what does it mean to be tied or not tied? But ultimately, you come back to the notion that the system of organization should encourage the most free and active participation in the decision-making process. And if it's not there yet, we can argue about whether or not they should continue to kill themselves in the hopes of effecting revolution, or whether they should wait until more auspicious times. And that's a great policy debate. But the ideal seems to be quite clear, which is everyone should be free to participate in this in order that their infinite implications can be properly realized. And just remember, we're responsible for everyone. That's okay, they're responsible for you too. All right, now we turn, we roll the dice. What do we got?